Thank you, German class, for coming. Okay. We get any German, we'll get you guys to translate. Actually, we have at least a little bit of German in here that you need to translate. So we have two veterans here from World War II, been there, done that, combat front lines in Europe. We have Mr. Gerhard Bauch, who's on the Russian front, and then follows that, actually being out on the Western front, fighting the Americans. And Mr. Joeseph Baclawski, who was on Western Front also, okay? And actually near the end of the war, they kind of end up pretty much in the same area, probably within about 25 miles of each other. So we'll get right started here. So,
fortunately, we didn't see each other at that point in time. Otherwise, we would have been shooting at each other. Okay. Got booby traps all around me, so I'm going to have to walk very carefully. Appreciate being here talking to you about my experiences in World War II. The war started when I was just about a year or two older than you are now. And Pearl Harbor happened. I was trying to earn some extra money and taking inventory in a grocery shop. They had the radio on, and they said, Pearl Harbor has been bombed. Nobody knew the geography of where Pearl Harbor was, but they finally explained where it was, and it really changed the world for us Americans and a good part of the world, too. I was living in Brooklyn, New York, and as a result of the attack on Pearl Harbor, I and two other cousins, just about my age, and a neighborhood kid, all enlisted in the lower part of Manhattan in the Army Reception Center. There were so many people enlisting at that point in time that it took us about a month, 3-4 weeks before we could get to a reception center. I wanted to finish my semester of Brooklyn College evening course, so I waited until the end of January and took the physical exam, got passed, was approved, and was sent out to Long Island. I had at that point in time a New Yorker's view of the United States. Let's see. Well, I'll illustrate here. Suppose you have a map this big to show the United States. To a New Yorker, this part, half of the map was taken over by Long Island, Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan. Here's the Hudson River. You never went beyond the Hudson River. Here was the little dot for Detroit and Chicago and San Francisco. That was the extent of my geographic knowledge at the time of Pearl Harbor. I learned quite a bit during the succeeding 4 years. I was sent up to a reception center in middle part of Long Island, Camp Upton, and was issued clothing and shoes. And to be sure that we had the right sort of shoes, they had a non-commissioned officer sitting there, but put your hands down. There was a little step ladder over here, and I was supposed to climb up on that. Every recruit was supposed to stand up on it. And then he'd give me a pail full of sand in one hand, full of sand in the other hand, and then they would measure my dimension for the shoes. I can tell you, I had a 9.5 C through walking hundreds of miles in the next four years, and I never had any trouble with footwear. And they issued me, it was February, they issued me a heavy wool coat. It went down below the knees. So I had lots of good clothing, good footwear, and as soon as, had another experience immediately upon getting to Camp Upton, there's an institution in the Army called KP, for enlisted personnel. What does KP mean? Kitchen police. And they designate the people who go on kitchen police by alphabetically. I'm B. So I got to kitchen police immediately in my first station, and when I got transferred from the reception center, I got acquainted with kitchen police. That meant getting up about 4 o'clock in the morning and working until 10, 11 o'clock at night, cleaning the pots and pans and peeling potatoes. They did not have potato machines to peel potatoes in those days. Was sent, within a few days, was sent down to a military unit, the 33rd Infantry Division, which was in Camp Forest, Tennessee. This was an infantry division that was originally National Guard in the Chicago area, and primarily, well, much of Illinois, but primarily Chicago. And these were old soldiers. They had been federalized a year before. They had been through the Louisiana maneuvers, and they talked about all these military infantry tactics. But and we were provided basic training, and we learned to march, and we were issued rifles. By then, everybody in that unit had a real rifle. We were so unprepared in about a year or two before, when some of the infantry divisions were first federalized, that they gave them toy rifles without metal mechanisms. But this was I was issued a real M1 rifle, 9 pound roughly, and when you were issued that rifle, you carried that rifle around all through the day. At first, it seemed like a real heavy thing. It's quite a bit more than a pencil, of course, but if you carry it around for a week or two, it was like a toy. But that's what they wanted to do, make us familiar with our weapon, basic weapon. Well, we went out physical training and 5-mile marches, and with packs and without packs, up to 20, 25 miles, and we got toughened up. Finally, after about, I think it was about 2 or 3 months, we got our orders to move out. This was an infantry division. It had 3 regiments of infantry, plus artillery and other types of military arms. But the basic force was 3 infantry regiments, each one about 3,000 people. And keep in mind, this was just about 3-4 months after Pearl Harbor. Where was the top priority to get these infantry troops? Obviously, to fight the Japanese, because the Japanese had attacked not only Pearl Harbor, they had made a minor attack in Alaska. There was talk that they could come even and attack the west coast of the United States. So one of the top priorities was to send our military to fight against the Japanese in the Pacific. I was not in the two of the 3 regiments that went to the Pacific. I was assigned to the 3rd Regiment. We're talking about high priority targets. What was the highest priority target that they assigned us to? It was a place in the United States. Any guesses as to where that could have been? Washington, yeah. That would be logical. Get control of the federal government and so on. That would be a possibility, yeah. Any other suggestions?
Virginia. Virginia.
Well, why Virginia? Except
There's,
Northern Virginia?
The Navy there, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
But maybe base, so.
But that Navy was on the East Coast, and might make more sense to put the troops on the West Coast to guard the Western Pacific, the Pacific Navy installation there. No, it was a place that you would not think of at all. Let's see if I push the button. Okay, there's a map of the Midwestern United States. And my infantry regiment was sent over here, let's see, yeah, right over here, on the Canadian border. Now, why is this important? These lines provide a clue to why this particular place was so important. Here's all of the mineral or the metal ores in Lake Superior. They would be coming down through the Lake Superior, through the locks. You know what a lock is? That's a place where a ship comes in at one level, and then they take the water out of it, and it drops down to a lower level. This was a higher level. There's a lower level in these lakes, and all the ships would go through these locks and would carry the ore to the manufacturing places, Chicago, Detroit, Toledo, and Cleveland. This is where they would be constructing tanks, trucks, airplanes, and these were the raw materials that had to get down here. Now, you might say, well, the bottleneck was a very critical one. The Germans had already demonstrated an interest in the Panama Canal, where you had a similar arrangement for transporting ships from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And they had reconnoitered that, so there was some concern that they might sabotage or bomb the Sulaks. This was quite realistic, because the year 1938, a 4-engine plane, ostensibly commercial, flew without notice directly from Berlin to the United States, non-stop. So the Germans had demonstrated their capability to travel, to move a plane these great distances. It took them 24 hours to get here, but they got here. It was quite a surprise to us. They landed at Floyd Bennett Airport in New York City, and this was ostensibly a commercial plane, but it could just as well have carried bombs. And it wouldn't have had the capability to return, but it could have landed. It was a one-way trip. It could have landed, probably would have even been captured. But they had the capability. And so this was a pretty realistic tactic on the part of the Defense Department. So my regiment of 3,000 troops, infantry troops, on guard at these locks and or the adjacent areas, summer and winter, 24 hours a day. I experienced temperatures of minus 40 degrees, and it gets pretty cold there. But we guarded the area night and day. There was some story that they caught some possible saboteurs, but in those days, that information was not publicized. And so to us, it was a rumor. It might have been true, might not have been. But we got out with loaded rifles, machine guns near the power plant, and guarded the whole area against possible sabotage. I was assigned to this area together with one of my cousins, and we got tired of just guard duty. We had enlisted to fight a war, so we both tried to get into the Air Force. He was able to make it. I was not able to make it because of eye problems. But I did apply to an alternate thing, the Army Specialized Training Program. By then, this was 1943, the Army Chief of Staff had looked at the situation and was concerned that this was going to be a 5-6 year war, and the colleges were not providing trained people in medicine and engineering and languages. So they started a program whereby men who were in the military services could volunteer for for this particular program, and they would send them to the leading colleges around the country. I was sent to the University of Chicago, and in 9 months of study, I had the equivalent of a year and a half of normal college program. It was a regimented program. You got up early in the morning, you got exercise, and then you took courses in English and in chemistry and physics and math. And every night there'd be a mandatory study period, lights out, no radio, no nothing, except to study because you had a test every week. And there was recitations every day. And if you didn't pass the test, you wouldn't last in the program. But I did quite well on that. I think I was usually about in the first 10 of a group of about 300-400 people. And so I finished that course and actually was sent on from basic engineering to advanced engineering. This was now a year later. The war situation had changed quite a bit. It was no longer a prospect of 5-6 years. We were achieving success in many different fields, and it looked like it was going to be a shorter war. So the whole program was canceled. And I got switched from working with slide rules. Anybody here know what a slide rule is? She knows, but anybody else? Yes, sir.
It's basically what they used before calculators. It'd be like 3 or 4 parts, and you sort of.
It's a calculation machine with your little slides, and you could get the right answer to three significant figures, which is usually what all you need in engineering and many science applications. It was a very nice device. It's completely overcome now with all these little things. But I still have one, and I can still use it. And instead of using a slide rule for engineering purposes, I was assigned to a combat engineer program in Fort Riley, Texas, Fort Riley, Kansas, excuse me. And instead of using a slide rule, the combat engineers used picks and shovels, and they would build bridges, they would lay mines against personnel, lay or detect mines, personnel, anti-personnel or anti-tank. And we built bridges. Now here's another interesting thing that was developed during the war. Again, you people, who knows erector sets? He's the only one. Anybody else know what an erector set is? Yes, sir.
I don't really know too well, but
Describe it as best you can.
sort of a little construction thing you can use, build various stuff.
They're a little piece of aluminum. They weigh about 2 or 3 ounces, and you put them together with screws and so on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And you put the things together and you build a vehicle or a building or something of this sort. Well, in the combat engineers, a British engineer by the name of Bailey used this concept, and he created 400-pound units that you put together. It took 4 men to handle them and put them together, or if you had a 600-pound unit, it took 6 men. And you could quickly assemble a bridge across a burned out, demolished bridge demolished by the enemy, and get your troops across streams and rivers and so on. I went across one of these bridges on the Rhine River later on. So that was a very interesting pragmatic application of engineering. And I was we were preparing to get our forces across from Britain to France in D-Day, and we were sending troops, large numbers of troops over to Europe, and I got across not in a convoy. Now, why did I say convoy? Convoys were very critical at that point in time because the German submarines were a major threat. Within a month after Germany declared war on the United States, there were submarines off the east coast of the U.S., and they were sinking ships within sight of New York. So they had a credible threat. They sank many ships that were going across the Atlantic and with ammunition, troops, food, and so on. So most of the time, to combat the anti-sub threat, they went in convoys, escorted eventually by destroyers. But I went first class. There was a transatlantic liner at that point in time going from the United States to Europe. The U.S. had special ships. French had ships. We had a few ships that could cross the Atlantic in about 4 or 5 days at higher speeds. I was put on to the Ile-de-France. That was the leading transatlantic line of the French. But instead of having a stateroom holding 2 or 3 people at most, they put in bunk beds, and there was 12, 16 people of us in one of these places. And we had a U.S. Navy guy up at the bow of the ship with a gun, and there was a Navy guy in the stern of the ship. They zigzagged. Frankly, I always had a question in my mind. All right, so you zigzag. That's all right if the sub is behind you or to the side. But what happens if the sub is in front of you? You might go right into the passage. Well, anyhow, we made it okay. Got to England, and by then D-Day had happened, and there was just a need for more and more infantry. So I was converted from combat engineers to infantry and was assigned as a replacement to the 100th Division, which had come in from the Mediterranean into northeastern France. As a replacement, let's see, it had been in combat only a few days. They already had encountered a number of casualties, and there was, I think, about 3 or 4 of us in the replacement group. And as we got into the first couple days of combat, in fact, the night before the first combat, I was sharing a foxhole that we dug along a road with one of my fellow replacements. And the next day when we got up, we were, let's see. Can I lift this? Or can I draw on here?
How about right here?
Okay, that's
Once we get it up, it's hard to get it down.
okay. We were going in terrain like this. This was heavily wooded. We got out of the woods. Here was our target. There was a church steeple over here, and the Germans, good soldiers, were good professional soldiers, had an observer there. So the first few of us got down the slope and were heading over here on the fire, and I was about here. And I saw some bullets flying all around me. I hit the ground and played dead and stayed that way for about 5-10 minutes. And my fellow replacement was obviously the next one to come across. I never saw him again. He was undoubtedly shot. So that was the first day of combat. When you're in the infantry, you're on the front lines. That's where all the action is. And I continued for 5 months in the front lines. And at the end of that, those 5 months, and there were about 4 or 5 of us, of a platoon of, I think it was about 40, 45 men. Platoon of 40, let's say 45 men, and there were only 5 of us at the end of 5 months that were not killed, wounded 1 or more times, or captured. And I was one of the lucky ones that didn't fall into that category. A particularly critical time was after we fought in the eastern parts of France through the Maginot Line, fortification line built up by the French, crossed the Rhine, and then on the other eastern side of the Rhine, we got to the town of Heilbronn. It was a major industrial town, and the Germans made this a major line of defense, and they put everything possible to prevent us from moving. We crossed the river, my particular platoon crossed the river in little paddle boats, paddled by the combat engineers. And we made the opposite shore very well. It was late afternoon, but we established ourselves in one of the office buildings in the glassworks, and we encountered some fire from the Germans around us. They're firing in all directions, and finally they killed the platoon leader and the sergeant leader of the platoon. They were up on the second floor, and they were hitting us with machine guns, bazookas, they call them Panzerfausts, and the building was on fire. We finally got the word to retreat, get out as best we could, and my foxhole buddy, Ralph Frazier, and I went up to the window. This was an office building. There was a ledge like where you're sitting, and why don't you get down for a moment? Okay. So I climbed up on the ledge, popped my head out the window, and it was dark by then, and I heard the words, "Sie kommen heraus." I don't want the German class to provide an answer. Well, but any of you who are not in the German class, can you translate that? Sie kommen heraus. In a way, this is a very simple translation. Sie is they are coming out. Okay, I pop my head out. It's dark, but I hear these German words. He sees me. It's obvious that he sees me. They have all the weapons there. So I turn around and tell Ralph Frazier, we're not going out that way. And he always claimed that I saved his life. Well, we managed to get out downstairs and out the back entrance and rejoined our troops. And but the whole building represented the destruction of our platoon. And Ralph and I managed to regain our positions with the rest of the company, and we managed to make it all, continue fighting down to Stuttgart and area and the end of the war. We're all glad to see the end of the war. Sometimes you will see statements that we never should have atom bombed Japan. Well, let me tell you this. My division, having completed operations in Germany and going from combat to occupation status, was scheduled to go back to the United States, get about 3-4 weeks of leave, and we were going to be transported to the Pacific coast for the invasion of Japan. Some people will tell you, they're not people who've been involved in the war, that it was not the right thing to do. If you're realistic, the Japanese would have fought tooth and nail. They had kamikaze. They had hundreds of kamikaze operatives. Any invasion would have been disastrous for the Allies and for the Japanese. They would have fought house to house. I think it would have been legitimate to say it would have cost at least 1 million Japanese and 1 million Allied troops. As it was, the atom bomb resulted in the Japanese emperor deciding to stop the war. Okay, that's all I have to say, and you're going to hear now from another combat infantryman, and he has much more to tell.
Cup of coffee. Cup of coffee.
Yeah.
You didn't tell your story.
Oh! Oh, God, yeah. One of the close calls that I had, was in the front lines in the winter. I was in a foxhole. You dig a hole, and there's two of you sleeping. One of you sleeps at a time, and the other one stays awake to make sure that then there's no enemy coming in, attacking you. So, got up, woke up in the morning, and our troop, our company jeep, came up with a big pot of hot coffee. That sounds real good after you've been freezing all night. So, one guy was told to go to the company jeep and get a cup of coffee. And then it was my turn. I went up there, and I picked up my canteen, which I had in a little sack like this, and I went up to filled it up with coffee, had it filled up with coffee, was walking back to my foxhole about 10 yards away from the jeep. Then a mortar shell hits right in front of me. And a mortar shell hits, and it fragments it. And it's the fragments that cause you damage. You hit a vital part, and you're dead. But I had a cup of coffee this way, and I hit the ground, and when I hit the ground, as I was hitting the ground, a mortar fragment hit the canteen cup and dented it. It wasn't strong enough to make a hole in it, but it dented it. And so I think very favorably of, I have favorable reactions to canteen cups. One more thing about the canteen cup, though. When I hit the ground and got up, I still had a cup of coffee, full cup of coffee. Automatic reaction to keep it level. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me that. I was trying to speed things up here. Now you're going to hear from another combat infantryman with a distinguished career with the German Luftwaffe.
Yeah.
Wehrmacht.
Yeah. I always admire Dr. Baclawski because he fits in his uniform, being 90 years old, which he was wearing when he was 23 years old. That is admirable. This uniform is not the one of the German army during the Second World War. This was created in 1965 by the Allies, America, France, England, to establish a new German army. And we made this uniform with ties. Formerly we had no ties, you know. So when I was 18 years old, and the Russian war in 1941 has already started, and we were thinking, my God, no, the war is going to end, and we sit here home and have no experience from this. So I volunteered and was in Western Germany, in the barracks. And then after half a year of training, we were sent to the Eastern Front. In the meantime, in Germany, I was chosen to be an officer's candidate. So as officer's candidate, we went to Russia, and we had to experience fighting there. So I went the first time. To Russia, and we were here in Kolpino. Kolpino is about 10 kilometers or 8 miles south of Leningrad. And we never took Leningrad, you know that. We only encircled it, and the Russians had a very heroic life there, because they had no food, and some of them ate even their own comrades. When they died, they ate something to survive, you know. And all the area around here is very swampy. And many German names here, Wöxdorf, Röscher, Peterhof, Oranienbaum, they're all German names which were created by Katharina the Great when they were there. And Kolpino, we were lying there on the river Volcho. Here's the Volcho. The Russian positions were about 40 yards away from ours. They had trenches, we had trenches. And as soon as they heard something, a little noise, you know, they threw hand grenades. And we did the same thing. So it was very difficult to survive there. Our company was at that time about 150 people. And after 14 days, we were 12. 12 were left over. I fortunately was the one under the 12, you know. So, and then we were shifted from Leningrad to the Volcho here, on the Volcho River. And the Volcho is a very swampy area. You can't make any trenches there. You have to build some horseshoe-like fortifications out of tree trunks. So we had a table there, the machine gun was put on there, and the German army was not strong enough to have a continuous line of defense. We had only strong points. Strong points, 30 men, a platoon, and then 600, 800 yards, nothing in between, another strong point. And in winter time, of course, it was difficult. You had to make reconnaissance between strong points to find out if somebody sneaked through. So when the general came to our front line, he said, well, these officers candidates, they have to get some experience. So I suggest they make some long-distance reconnaissance. Long-distance reconnaissance was meant we go through the Russian lines, maybe 2-3 kilometers behind the Russian lines, and put some mines on their supply lines. So we did this, and we left at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At 5 o'clock it was dark, and by 6 o'clock the Russians were about 2 miles away from us. Everything was forest. So we had to walk very carefully. We had 4 men. One was going ahead, 50, 60, 80 yards before us, and the other 3 were following them. We had to make this because behind every tree we could suspect the Russian would shoot us, you know. So we had to send somebody in advance to find out if there is somebody. So when we came to the Russian lines, we had to find out where is there. There are strong points that we can sneak through between 2 strong points. And since it was winter, it was snow, it was a little bit more difficult because we couldn't go back the same way. We had to find another way to go back because in the meantime, when we were behind the Russian lines, the Russians made some reconnaissance from strong point to strong point and saw our steps there. So we had to find another way to go back. And we mostly did. It took time, but we were not in a hurry. We had to walk 2.5 miles back to our own positions. But since we had 2 feet of snow, so you walk very slowly. And you go anywhere slow because you expect anywhere some enemies to shoot at you. So we came back and we made these reconnaissance about 3 times. And the last time when we went there, we hit on a single Russian sentry they also had these horseshoes made out of wood, you know, and stood behind it. We came from behind and said, "Ruki Werk," it means hands up in Russian. And then he took his hands up and we unloaded his machine gun. The Russians had very old machine guns from 1915, water-cooled machine guns. They were very slow. They maybe 300 rounds per minute they made, you know. So we unloaded his gun. It was easy. We clapped it up and took the belt out and gave him this to carry it and then say, "Go this direction there." So we took him home as a prisoner to ours. And we had still some mines which we had to use. So the bunker was maybe 50 yards away from where the sentry was standing. And it's not a real bunker, it was an underground living facility where the Russians were sleeping and cooking and living there. And they were singing, you know. So it was war. We went in, opened the door, and saw the mine inside there, and exploded afterwards, you know. So they couldn't follow us then. And we came back to our own positions. And anytime we came back from a reconnaissance like this, we got a reward. We got chocolate, half a bottle of red wine, and it was very seldom that we could have it. So we were very happy to have this. So then after half a year, there was no heavy fighting anymore in the Volho front. We had made only these reconnaissance. And after half a year, I was sent to the War Academy to Potsdam. And after half a year, we were made a lieutenant. So normally, a lieutenant is a platoon leader, 30 men, yes. But when I came to the middle section of the Russian front, Doesn't work. Ah,
Wrong one.
okay. So there were Leningrad, and we were here in Vitebsk, Smolensk, in this area we were. Veliki Luki. And Minsk. Minsk was the headquarters of the army group. So here we were. And it was winter time, of course, also again. I must say, I know only winter warfare in Russia, because when the winter was over in springtime, I got wounded. I was home and was active again in winter time. So here it was very cold. We had about 40 degrees below zero, and we had to attack in Vitebsk, and the Russians were, as you can imagine, were excellent soldiers. They were very tough. Even Frederick the Great, the Prussian king, in 1765, said, "It's not enough to shoot a Russian. You have to push him down too." So it shows you how tough and perseverant they were. So in Vitebsk, we had to encounter some Russian attacks with T-34 tanks, which was at that time the best tank in the world. It was not that elegantly furnished inside like American tanks or German tanks, you know, to make it more livable for the crew to live there. But the tanks were built with one purpose: to survive any attack and to be able to cross high snow and mud, which was in the October, November time, when there was no snow. There was the mud period. The streets we were walking, we went knee-deep into mud, you know. And when you had these normal German boots on, they would stick in the someone. Your socks would go into the mud the next time, you know. So, and the German engineering troops, they built some, how do you call them? Corduroy ways, you know. But they didn't last long. 3-4 trucks went over, and the engineering troops had to come to repair it again. It was very labor intensive. And when the Russians attacked this time, in winter time, we had, fortunately, about 800 yards behind our front line, an anti-aircraft gun of 4 inches caliber. And anti-aircraft guns are shooting very accurate. On 2 miles, 1.5 miles, the first shot was a hit on a tank, you know. So it was only 800 yards, and the Russian tanks had a railing on the back. And within the railing were about 4, 5, 6 Russian infantry guys that they don't fall down at the railing there. So we were shooting, and then we all killed them. And then the tank went through our lines, but shortly afterwards, the anti-aircraft gun was hitting the tank, and the cupola flew off the tank, flew away 20 yards in the air. So we were very happy about it. And the Russians attacked in those days, in early 42 still. They didn't have enough weapons, so every third man had a rifle only, and the other one, they hooked themselves together, and commissar were behind them with a machine pistol and drove them in front of them. So when they came like this, in rows, you know, we waited until they were 80 to 100 yards before our front line, and then we opened fire with everything we had. And I must say, the German machine guns, they were the best in the world, and I think they still are. They had a firepower of 3,000 rounds per minute. So when they were on a lafette and you pulled the trigger, you could hardly hear any shot. It was a noise only which went. And of course, the Russians had tremendous casualties there. All the dead lay before our front line. But since it was winter time, we didn't have to bury them because they were all frozen, all cold. In summertime, we would have to bury them because of sicknesses and the smelling. So one day we were for Vitebsk, in 1944, and we had to attack at 5 o'clock in the evening. It was already becoming dark. We had about 1 feet of snow, but it was February and it was melting already. So that had an advantage for us when we attacked. The Russian artillery didn't many casualties for us, because when the artillery went into the swamp down, the splinters came up like this and didn't go this way. So we didn't have any casualties from the artillery. But then we came closer to the infantry and they were shooting hard, and I was lying down and shooting too, and all of a sudden my legs and my body went up like this, you know. So I was hit, had a bullet through my right lung, and I could feel with every heartbeat how the blood went out of the ribs and the back, you know. So, but if fighting is hard, you always find soldiers who are willing to help you, not so much because of helping, but to escape the front area, because they put you on a sledge, you know, and pulled you back. So they were happy to avoid the front line. So they brought me to the first aid station, and our battalion doctor told me that he collapsed my lung, and I am going to be on a train to Minsk. To Minsk. So I couldn't speak anymore. I had no strength of speaking anymore. I could only whisper. and could hardly lift my arm. But as it is in war, you know, I had my Meldetasche, my bag at the side on my koppel. They took it off, and when I was put in the ambulance, you know, they gave this leather thing back to me. I looked at it, everything was taken out and stolen, you know. Oh, that was normal. So we stood this. So I forgot to mention something. And one day when the Russians attacked us with tanks, we sat in our holes, and when a tank comes and rolls over you, it is not dangerous because it was so cold that the frost was at least 1.5 feet was frozen ground. So when the tank rolled over it, it didn't scratch it. It didn't destroy it. In summertime, if they roll over, they would kill you, you know. So when he passed over and he rolled over me, you know, I had a Faustpatrone. That's this is a 2-kilo explosive in, and it is concentrated that it goes on a 1-inch point only. It doesn't go apart. And here is full iron to drive it like a rocket. So we could shoot with it 30 yards. So when the tank rolled over me, I shot it, and I must have hit the motor and the gasoline tank. At least the whole tank was in flames, and the Russians jumped out there. So when I was then in the hospital, I got 2 blood transfusions because I had lost all the blood. And then I was sent to Warsaw. In Warsaw I was maybe 14 days. And then I was sent to the Silesia, to a hospital to recover there. And that was nice because I had 6 months' time to enjoy myself there. After 2 months I could walk around again. I was able to do some things, and I had to go swimming and had to dive a lot in order and exhale underwater in order to expand my lung again. So that was nice. I was in the sun and was nice tanned. And one day the commission came to look at the hospitalized soldiers, you know. The doctor saw me, I was all brown tanned, you know, fantastic. So he said, "My God, are you healthy? You can go to the front again," you know. So they sent me off again. So I came to the Western Front this time, because my reserve battalion was in Cologne, and Cologne was about 80 miles from the Western German border away. So I went there and then came to Holland. In Holland we were put together.
5 minutes.
Okay. We were about training there, And then we were sent to the Vosk Mountains. Strasbourg, you may remember, Strasbourg. Yeah, that is here. Ah, upside down. Yeah. We were in Saarbrücken, here in this area. Metz. And in the meantime, I was made a captain and was battalion commander. In Russia, I was company commander, 19 years old. My oldest soldier was 42 years old. Crazy. But the life of a German officer in Russia was about, in the average, 3 weeks. Either was dead or was wounded. So I made 2 months and I was wounded. So here we were fighting the Americans. But when I had the battalion come together, I told them I don't want any heroes anymore. You shoot only on Americans if you have to defend yourself. Otherwise you don't shoot. And when they attack, you retreat. So when we are in these villages here, Saarbrücken, in the Vosk Mountains, they were mostly German-speaking Lord Mayors there. So from our village we phoned the American side, the village of where the Americans were there, and asked the Bürgermeister, what are they doing? Oh, they are shaving now. I say, okay, then in 1 hour they're attacking. Or they enjoy their breakfast now. Okay, fine. When they attacked at 9 o'clock, 9:30 they attacked, then we withdrew slowly. And we didn't have many casualties, but one day I was about 250 yards with my headquarters battalion commander behind the front line. And with my sergeant, I wanted to go and visit the companies. So it was all forests, all wood, and we also had a...
Got about a minute, Gerhard.
yeah,
About 1 minute.
yeah, we had strong points, and so we went there. And all of a sudden, the sergeant, it's about 10 yards before me, he lifts up his hands. I look around and saw Americans, beautiful camouflage, all the barrels pointing on me, you know. So I couldn't do anything else, I lift my hands too. So I was made a prisoner of war there. That was the end of my fighting experiences. Yeah. But I must say, I was not disappointed to be a prisoner in those days.